Hello, welcome to Mont Park Model Railway. This month's video is titled Back EMF, Voltage Drops and the Phantom Menace. So this video isn't going to be a technical explanation of back EMF. There are other sources on YouTube that describe that in great detail. Rather, this video is going to demonstrate some of the effects that can occur if it's not set up correctly. I had started filming for this video while tracking down what I thought was a voltage drop issue. However, as I worked through the fault finding process and the diagnosis, turned out to be something quite different, contributing to the observed effect. Over the last 6 months or so, I've spent quite a bit of effort regrading a lot of the climbs and also the declines on Mont Park Model Railway, basically regrading the gradients. But there was one section that was particularly annoying, which was the climb from Peterborough up to Lichfield, that despite regrading it, which did make an improvement, trains appeared to slow as they went round the first bend, as they left Peterborough to do the initial climb. And I thought I was just an optical illusion at first, so I decided to investigate it further to see whether I was just imagining it or whether there was actually something materially wrong with that part of the track. Just put a simple definition or explanation for back EMF before I get into the actual fault process that I went through. Back EMF is a train controller's ability to monitor the power going to a train or a locomotive, and then as a locomotive starts to struggle up an incline, it can automatically increase the power available to the loco to maintain its speed. And likewise, if a loco is going down an incline and it starts to race away, it can automatically pull the power down and reduce the speeds trained to reduce the racing. And so that's just a simple explanation of what back EMF does and how you can observe it. Anyway, we'll get on with the actual fault finding process. So what I decided to do is set up test conditions to see if I could monitor the power, or the voltage at least, going to that section of track. And so I chose a particular train that I knew was fairly constant in its normal running and would often seem to be observed to slow as it rounded the bend and made the climb. And what I was able to observe is that as that train approached the curve and started the climb, the voltage was actually dropping. And so much so that in some parts, as it went round the layout, the voltage was going up to 9 volts, and when it made that climb, it would drop well below 7 volts. So I was getting well over 2 volts difference as that same train made its way round the whole of the layout. So that was measuring the power as on the departure side of the Peterborough Station as it made its way up the climb towards Lichfield. So the way the Mont Park Railway the power is put into that section of track is actually at the other end of the station. So I moved my multimeter down to the approach side of Peterborough Station and then found that it was probably not quite 0.5 volts difference between one end and the other, but that was significantly different. Didn't explain why I was get over 2 volts difference at that end of the station as the train went through. So then I ran the train through the section, and sure enough, the voltage was actually dropping, even though as the train went round the bend at the far end of the station, at the departure side, it was still measured. You could measure the drop occurring also at the point where the power came into the track for that section. So I thought, maybe one of the switches on my control panel or a bit of the wiring is not up to scratch, and so that's why I'm getting voltage drop. So I moved my multimeter to the actual output directly on the back of my controller, and then ran the same test and found that the voltage was actually dropping as it came out of the back of the controller. And so this helped me start to pinpoint that the problem wasn't necessarily anywhere on my layout or the wiring, but the controller itself was was dropping voltage internally. Now, I had built the controller myself, I know, probably nearly 10 years ago maybe, and so I thought my soldering skills and what have you was pretty good, but so it needs to be closer investigation. So before I started madly pulling the main controller apart to see what might be the problem, I thought I'll switch it over to my walk-around controller. Now the walk-around throttle uses a very similar circuitry for the actual supply to the power, but it's probably based on 1980s circuitry, but still also has a back EMF capability. And so, much to my surprise, as I ran the train round, it wasn't having the voltage drop issues. And I thought, well, that's pretty pinpointing that it is just the main controller, and nothing to do with the track or the wiring, and it had to be. And so the walk-around throttle with the older circuitry, it's started to point it must be the back EMF capability, because it was operating. It slightly increased the power as the train maintained its speed up the gradient, and also then I was able to observe it would actually also back off the power as it went down the inclines back into Peterborough. So in reading out, got out the manual for the main controller and went straight to the circuit diagram to say, something's not wired up properly. I've made a mistake when I've assembled it or something similar, and found that the two controllers that I have, the 1980s version, the 1990s version, even though they got the same transistor array that regulates the power, the actual method that they use for monitoring and controlling the back EMF capability is quite different. The older one uses just discrete circuitry. However, the slightly newer controller has a PIC chip, like a small computer chip that actually monitors and actually makes decisions on the back EMF regulation. So I thought, well, do I pull it apart and find out why this is not working, or do I actually read the manual? So thankfully, I bothered to spend a few minutes reading the manual to find there's actually a setting for configuring the way the PIC chip operates and responds to back EMF. And so it has a configuration parameter that can be set any between 0, which is off, and 100, which is full back EMF, even though it suggests the ideal setting is around about 40. So I logged on to the little panel on the main controller and went to that parameter, and lo and behold, it was set to 0. So back EMF was actually turned off, and which directly correlates to what I've been observing, that trains were slowing and not able to maintain speed up inclines, and consequently there was no functionality happening as they went down the gradients, hence the racing. So I set the parameter to 40 and saved it, and then reran the same test. And as probably should be able to be predicted, there was a dramatic change in the way different trains ran on Mont Park after setting the back EMF on the main controller to 40. As the trains approached the gradient, there was only 0.2 to 0.3 voltage drop as they made their way up the climb, And sure enough, when they went down the inclines, previously the voltage was going up to 9 volts, it was held almost steady, and the trains would actually, you could actually see the trains slightly retarding their speed as they compared to previous runs down the inclines. So that was a big win. So what I also found after a few days running with the modified back EMF, that all the trains no longer needed as much throttle as they previously did. And on average, there's at least a 10 to 15% less throttle required to give the same running experience around the layout. And this also was observable by an old Ren A4 that I have. It struggled with only a 3-car rake around the layout, and you had to run it at nearly 90% throttle to get it around all the inclines. And sure enough, when it was running at 90% throttle, it would actually be racing quite hard even on the flat sections. However, what I was able to observe is that now runs at about 70% throttle and can take a whole 5-car rake, which is the standard rake for Mont Park Model Railway, and it maintains almost a constant speed around the layout and easily makes the inclines without any problems. This now leads me back to the actual subject of this video. So I started off looking for voltage drop around my layout and thinking that I had poor joins or a dodgy switch, or the wiring gauge may not be heavy enough to supply power to the layout. However, during the diagnosis, it's actually a function of the controllers. And even though this is an analog DC layout, there is a version of that can occur in DCC decoder chips that go in the locos. They also have configuration for back EMF. So it could be an interesting experiment one day when I go to DCC to observe different locos and how they respond, and perceive voltage drops may not be voltage drops at all. And so hence the reference to the phantom menace, that sometimes you're looking down, going down one track, but in actual fact what's the problem is something quite different. And so interestingly, the locos are now more responsive at slower speeds. So previously I was seemingly stuck with having to run most of the locos at a certain speed, so that because Mont Park has several gradients as they pass round a full lap of the layout, and I had to maintain, you either had to drive the train constantly modifying the throttle, or set it at a particular one which was enough to make it up the steepest gradient, and then which also made it look like they were racing down the inclines. However, with the back EMF set correctly and running, they actually now run at slower speeds, and maybe some people might call the speeds now more prototypical. That's probably true, but also even on parts of the layout where you're just doing shunting, which is on a flat section, even the loco's response and starting there is improved. So all up, a big good win. Anyway, that's the end of this month's video about back EMF, voltage drop and the phantom menace. And it was an interesting journey going on to what I thought was specifically a voltage drop or poor connections issue, to work out that it actually was a problem with something called back EMF, which is a controller's ability to automatically monitor the power to a loco and either increase it slightly as it's going up an incline, or also back it off as it's going down that incline. And the phantom menace that you get where you're trying to follow something down that's not what you think it might be. Anyway, that's all for now, and we'll catch you next time.